Welcome to Simplified UPSC by PPP, where we listen, learn, and grow together. Detailed lecture notes in English and Hindi, plus practice questions for prelims and mains, only on our Telegram channel. Link in description. Like and subscribe for more.
Welcome to the deep dive. We take complex source material, unpack it, and, well, deliver the essential knowledge straight to you.
And today, we're tackling something pretty fundamental.
Yeah, a huge question, really, especially for modern India. How does a country developing so fast, building massive projects, dams, factories, mines.
Huge infrastructure, yeah.
How does it do that while also protecting, well, its environment, its ecological heritage, which is irreplaceable?
That tension, it's always there, isn't it? A constant balancing act. And the main tool, the mechanism designed to navigate this is the environmental impact assessment, the EIA.
Right, the EIA.
So our focus today is really to get under the hood of the EIA. We want to pull out the exact legal bits, the step-by-step process, and, importantly, look at the governance challenges, too. Where does it sometimes fall short?
Exactly. Our mission here is to get beyond just the acronym. We want you, by the end of this deep dive, to have a really solid grasp of who does what, the institutions involved, and the rules for getting environmental clearance in India.
Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. The official definition. What is an EIA, formally?
Good place to start.
It's defined as the comprehensive process of identifying, predicting, evaluating, and this is key, mitigating the biophysical, social, and other relevant effects.
Of development project.
Exactly, of developmental proposals, and crucially, prior to major decisions being taken, before commitments are made.
So it's preventative, anticipatory.
That's the core idea. It's meant to be forward-looking.
Okay, makes sense. But what gives it teeth? Legally speaking, I mean, where does the government get the authority to demand such a big study?
The legal underpinning. That comes directly from India's main environmental law, the Environment Protection Act.
The 1986 Act.
Precisely, 1986. That act is the parent legislation. It gives the central government the power, the mandate, to create specific rules and notifications, like the EIA notification, that spell out how EIA must actually be done and enforced.
Okay, so we have the legal foundation, the Environment Protection Act. Now let's shift to the why. Why bother with this whole EIA process? Why is it seen as so important for sustainable development, especially when there's so much pressure to just, build things quickly?
Right, the rationale. Well, the objectives are kind of layered, and they definitely tie into broader sustainable development goals. The GS Paper 3 relevance here.
Okay.
The most immediate goal, the practical one, is prediction and mitigation. It's not just about saying, this might cause pollution.
No, it's more specific.
Much more. It's about forecasting the specific environmental consequences before they happen. And then, based on that forecast, developing concrete strategies to either eliminate those negative impacts or at least significantly reduce them.
So looking ahead and planning fixes in advance, that seems critical.
It is. And that predictive part directly feeds into the second big objective, informed decision-making.
Making sure the people in charge know what they're getting into.
Exactly. The EIA acts like a detailed report card for the project. It presents the options clearly to the decision maker, the regulatory authority. It forces them to weigh the environmental costs against the economic benefits.
Wow.
It makes the trade-offs visible, transparent.
So they see, here's the project as is, here it is with these protective measures, maybe here's an alternative site, that sort of thing.
Precisely, which leads to the third aim, sustainable integration. The idea is to embed environmental thinking right into the very beginning of the planning process.
Not just tacking it on at the end.
Right, so you ensure environmental factors are considered from day one.
Yeah.
This helps optimize resource use for the long haul, for society's benefit overall.
It really sounds like the EIA is where the precautionary principle gets real, doesn't it? Taking that abstract idea and making it concrete.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
So what are the big benefits, both practical and maybe philosophical, from doing this properly?
Well, philosophically, you hit it. It embodies the precautionary principle in action. We're consciously choosing to minimize risks we can foresee.
And practically.
Think long-term savings. You avoid potentially massive costs down the road. Cleaning up pollution, dealing with health crises from contamination, the irreversible loss of species or habitats.
Prevention is cheaper than cure.
Almost always, yes.
Yeah.
Both environmentally and financially. It's usually much cheaper to prevent the damage than to try and fix it years later.
And I imagine the process itself can actually lead to better projects, better engineering.
Absolutely. That's another key benefit, design improvement. When you identify potential environmental problems early on.
Like a conflict with a water source or causing too much noise for a nearby village?
Exactly. You can then tweak the project design, maybe use cleaner technology, or find ways to use resources more efficiently right from the start. It shifts the whole mindset from we'll deal with pollution later to let's design it so there's less pollution.
That makes a lot of sense. And there's one more benefit, crucial in a democracy, but maybe sometimes overlooked until things go wrong.
You're thinking of public awareness and participation?
Yes, that seems vital.
It's absolutely fundamental for environmental justice. A proper EIA process mandates informing the public, especially the local communities, the people who might be displaced or face noise or lose access to resources.
So they know what's being proposed.
They know what's proposed, and crucially, they get a formal way to voice their concerns, their objections, their suggestions. The EIA mechanism explicitly aims to increase public awareness. It makes the whole decision more accountable to the people actually affected.
Okay, so the philosophy is clear. Prevent harm, involve the public, make informed decisions. Now let's map out the machinery. Who actually runs this process? Who has the power to say yes or no to a project?
Right, the institutional setup. The system we use in India today is largely governed by the EIA notification of 2006. This notification updated and replaced some older rules.
And what's the big change it brought in?
Probably the most significant thing about the 2006 notification was how it decentralized the environmental clearance, or EC, process. It did this by creating two main categories for projects, based on their potential scale and impact.
Okay, let's break down those categories. This sounds like key info, maybe especially for prelims focus. Let's start with Category A.
Right. Category A projects are the big ones. These are projects where their sheer size or the nature of their operations suggest they'll likely have significant environmental impacts, maybe impacts that even cross state lines or have wider implications.
So high risk, high impact potential.
That's the idea. Because of this perceived high risk, getting environmental clearance is mandatory, and the entire appraisal process happens at the central level.
Okay, central level. Who are the key players there? Which bodies are involved?
The main agency is the Ministry of Environment, Forest, and Climate Change, the MOEFCC. Specifically, its Impact Assessment Agency, or IAA.
Okay, the MOEFCC.
And the technical group that actually reviews the EIA report and advises the ministry is the Expert Appraisal Committee, the EAC.
So the EAC reviews and advises, the MOEFCC decides. And what about the composition of the EAC?
It's supposed to be multidisciplinary, specialists from various relevant fields.
Got it. Now, a crucial point, you mentioned screening. We'll get into the stages soon, but do Category A projects go through that initial screening stage?
No, they don't. That's an important distinction. Category A projects are automatically assumed to need the highest level of scrutiny. So they bypass screening entirely. They must go through the full, detailed EIA process.
Okay, no screening for Category A. That takes us to Category B projects. This is where the decentralization comes in.
Exactly. Category B projects are generally smaller in scale, or their impacts are expected to be more localized. For these, the appraisal happens at the state level.
And who grants the clearance at the state level?
The authority is the State-Level Environment Impact Assessment Authority, known as the SAA.
The SAA.
And just like at the central level, EIA has a technical advisory body assisting it. That's the State Expert Appraisal Committee, or SCE.
So, parallel structures. EIC advising MOEFCC centrally, and SEAC advising SE at the state level. It's really important to get those roles clear, isn't it? The committees advise, the authorities decide.
That's precisely it. The EAC and SAC provide the technical review and recommendations. But the statutory power to actually grant or deny the environmental clearance rests with the MOEFCC for Category A and the SEAA for Category B.
Okay, clear. But you mentioned there's another layer of complexity within Category B itself, something about B1 and B2. This determines if they need a full EIA at all.
Yes, that's a critical split. Category B projects don't automatically go for full appraisal. First, they undergo a process called screening.
Ah, so this is where screening applies.
Correct. Only Category B projects are screened, and the outcome of that screening determines if they are classified as B1 or B2.
Okay, tell us about B1 first.
Category B1 projects are those that, after screening, are deemed to have significant enough potential impacts that they mandatorily require a full EIA study. They have to go through the whole process, scoping, detailed report, public hearing, everything. Even though they're state-level projects, they still pose enough environmental risk to warrant the full assessment.
Got it. So B1 means full EIA required, just handled at the state level. What about B2 then?
Category B2 projects are the ones that get an exemption. They are excluded from needing a full EIA study and the whole process that entails.
Why? On what basis?
They're generally considered to have minimal impacts. Often, they fall below certain specific criteria laid out in the 2006 notification, maybe related to size, capacity, or investment cost.
So this B1, B2 split is really significant because B2 projects get a much faster track, bypassing the most demanding parts of the EIA.
Exactly. It streamlines the process for smaller projects deemed less impactful, while still requiring the full scrutiny for the larger state-level ones, B1, and the major national ones, Category A. It tries to match the level of assessment to the level of risk.
Okay, let me try and summarize that structure for everyone listening. Category A, the big national projects, always need central clearance, always need a full EIA, no screening. Category B, state-level projects first get screened. If they're B1, they need a full EIA, appraised by the state. If they're B2, they don't need a full EIA. That framework seems designed to focus the deep scrutiny where it's most needed.
That's the intended logic, yes.
Yes.
Right. Understanding who decides is crucial, but knowing how they decide, the actual sequence of steps, is just as important. The EIA cycle, especially for those Category A and B1 projects that require the full assessment, follows a very specific chronological order. There are 8 main stages.
8 stages. And the sequence matters.
Absolutely. The sequence is critical. You can't really skip a step or do them out of order without fundamentally undermining the process. It's designed as a logical progression.
Okay, let's walk through them one by one then. Stage 1, you already mentioned, screening.
Yes. And its purpose is very focused. Simply to determine if the proposed project needs a full environmental impact assessment study or not.
And as we just established, this only applies to...
Only to Category B projects. It's the sorting mechanism to put them into either the B1 bucket, meaning yes, full EIA needed, or the B2 bucket, meaning no full EIA required. Category A projects, remember, skip this entirely because they automatically need the full EIA.
Right. So if a project is Category A or it's screened as Category B1, what's the next step? Stage 2.
Stage 2 is scoping. This is a really crucial planning stage for the EIA study itself.
Planning how?
Scoping is where you define the terms of reference, the TOR, for the study. Think of it like setting the boundaries and the focus. You identify which potential impacts are the most important ones to investigate deeply.
So you don't waste time on irrelevant stuff.
Exactly. Focus the effort. It also involves setting the geographical area the study will cover, the time frame it considers, and figuring out exactly what kind of data needs to be collected.
So scoping basically writes the rule book for the specific EIA study about to happen. That leads logically to Stage 3, baseline data collection.
Correct. Now that you know what to study and where, you need to establish the starting point. Baseline data collection is about meticulously describing the existing environmental conditions in the study area.
Before the project even starts.
Precisely. Before any construction begins. This involves going out and gathering primary data, actual measurements of air quality, water quality, noise levels, identifying the local plants and animals, understanding the socioeconomic situation of the people living there.
On-the-ground data.
Yes, site-specific primary data, often supplemented with existing secondary data if it's reliable. This baseline is the benchmark against which you'll measure the project's future impacts.
Okay, so you have the before picture. Stage 4 must be about predicting the after.
Exactly. Stage 4 is impact prediction. This is where the analytical heavy lifting happens.
How do they predict the future?
It involves forecasting what the environmental conditions will be like if the project goes ahead as planned. You compare this prediction to the baseline data and also to a scenario where the project doesn't happen at all.
And this uses models.
Yes, it often relies on scientific models, predictive tools, perhaps matrices to map cause and effect, and definitely expert judgment. The aim is to forecast the likely changes physical, biological, social, economic over the lifetime of the project.
Okay, so you've predicted the potential harms. Stage 5 must be about dealing with them.
Right. Stage 5 is mitigation measures and EIA report preparation. First, mitigation. Having identified the likely negative impacts.
Like pollution or habitat loss?
The project proponent must propose concrete actions to eliminate, offset, or at least reduce those impacts.
What kind of actions?
It could be anything from installing specific pollution control technology to creating green buffer zones around the site to reduce noise, or developing detailed plans for resettling and compensating people who might be displaced. The focus is on specific measures at the source of the impact, along its pathway, or at the receptor.
And then they compile all this into the report.
Yes. All the findings, baseline data, impact predictions, proposed mitigation measures are compiled into the comprehensive EIA report. This report should clearly lay out the different scenarios and must also acknowledge any uncertainties in the predictions made.
Okay, the big report is ready. What's next? Stage 6 sounds important for democracy, the public hearing.
Extremely important. Unless a project gets a specific exemption, this stage is mandatory. Its whole purpose is to inform the people who are likely to be affected by the project and, crucially, to consult them.
So local communities, workers, anyone impacted gets a say.
That's the intent. It ensures their views, concerns, and local knowledge are formally recorded and considered before a final decision is made.
How does that work practically? How do people find out and participate?
Well, first, anyone likely to be affected has the legal right to access at least the executive summary of that big VIA report we just talked about.
Okay, access to information.
Then, the State Pollution Control Board is responsible for publicizing the hearing. They have to put a notice in at least 2 newspapers that circulate widely in that area. And critically, one of those newspapers must be in the local vernacular language.
To ensure people can actually read it.
Exactly. The notice invites people to submit their suggestions, comments, views, objections, whatever they want to say, within 30 days from when the notice is published. The hearing itself is meant to be an open forum.
30 days, okay. So, the public has had its say. We move to stage 7. Decision-making or appraisal, the moment of judgment.
Pretty much. This is where the regulatory authority makes the call. Remember who that is?
Centrally, it's the MOE-FCC, based on the ESC's advice for Category A. And at the state level, it's the CAA, based on the SCSC's advice for Category B1.
Perfect. So that authority reviews everything. The detailed technical EIA report, the mitigation plan proposed by the developer, and very importantly, the feedback, the objections, the suggestions received during the public hearing.
And based on all that?
Based on all that, they decide. They can either grant the environmental clearance, EC, as is, grant it but with additional conditions attached, or they can reject the project outright.
Okay, the decision is made. Let's say clearance is granted. Is that the end of the story?
Not quite. There's one final crucial stage, stage 8, post-clearance monitoring.
Follow-up. Accountability.
Exactly. Getting the EC isn't a blank check. This stage is mandatory to make sure the company, the project proponent, actually does what it promised in the EIA report and complies with all the conditions laid down in the clearance certificate.
How is that monitored?
It involves checking if the mitigation measures are working, if pollution levels are within limits, basically comparing the actual impacts on the ground with what was predicted in the report. Often, the company has to submit regular compliance reports to the regulatory body, usually the regional offices of the MOE-FCC. This monitoring can sometimes continue for the entire life of the project.
Okay, that 8-step process maps out the ideal pathway. Screening, scoping, baseline data, prediction, mitigation and report, public hearing, decision, monitoring. It sounds quite thorough on paper.
It is designed to be comprehensive, yes.
But, any system is only as good as how it works in practice. The governance aspect is key. Before we dive into the common criticisms, maybe a quick Q&A to just nail down one institutional point we discussed earlier.
Sure, let's do it.
We talked about Category A being central and Category B being state-level appraisal. If you had to boil it down, what's the fundamental principle or reason behind that split? Why not just do everything centrally or everything at the state level?
That's a good question. The underlying principle is often called subsidiarity. It's the idea that decisions should be taken at the lowest possible or most local competent level.
Makes sense. Handle things locally if possible.
Right. So Category A projects the really big ones like major dams or power plants.
Yeah.
Their impacts might be felt across states or even nationally. So they need that national level oversight from the MOE-FCC and EAC.
Okay.
But Category B projects think smaller factories, maybe some quarries. Their impacts are usually more localized. So devolving their appraisal to the state level, to the SCA and SCA, brings the decision-making closer to the people and the environment actually affected.
So it aims for efficiency for smaller projects while keeping central control for the big ones.
That's the balance it tries to strike, yes. Faster decisions for genuinely local projects, but maintaining central scrutiny for those with potentially larger, wider environmental footprints.
Okay, that clarifies the intended logic of the decentralization. But now, let's get into the critiques. When we look at how this EIA system actually functions on the ground in India, with all the pressures for development, well, problems emerge. What are some of the major weaknesses or criticisms highlighted in the source material? Maybe start with who even needs an EIA?
Yeah, the first big issue is applicability loopholes. The whole idea of a comprehensive assessment system kind of breaks down if significant projects can just bypass it entirely.
And how do they manage that? How do projects slip through the net?
There are a couple of main ways mentioned. First, a project type might simply not be listed in Schedule 1 of the EIA notification. If it's not listed, it might not require clearance, even if it seems environmentally risky.
So gaps in the list itself.
Yes. And second, and this is quite common, projects might fall below certain investment thresholds. The notification sets financial limits. If your project costs less than X amount, you might be exempt from the EIA process, even if, say, you're building right next to a sensitive wetland or forest.
Wow. So the cost, not necessarily the environmental impact, can be the deciding factor for exemption.
That's a major criticism, yes. These loopholes mean environmentally damaging activities can sometimes proceed legally, but without any prior assessment of the risks.
Okay, so assuming a project does require an EIA, what's the next problem area? I recall reading about the expertise of the committees.
Right. The composition of the appraisal committees, the EAC at the center, the SEACs in the states, is frequently criticized. The issue is a lack of comprehensive, multidisciplinary expertise.
Meaning?
Well, these EIA reports cover a huge range of topics: water science, air pollution, wildlife biology, soil science, social impacts on communities, engineering aspects.
A lot of different fields.
Exactly. But the committees reviewing these complex reports often don't have specialists from all those necessary fields. They might be heavy on engineers, for example, but lack an anthropologist who can properly assess social impacts, or a wildlife expert for biodiversity concerns.
And that leads to?
It can lead to an incomplete assessment. Certain types of impacts, especially the non-economic or social ones, might not get the scrutiny they deserve.
That lack of expertise seems serious, and it connects to perhaps the most worrying criticism, issues around data quality, fraud even.
Yes, unfortunately, this is a major point of concern highlighted in the material. Data fraud and poor quality in EIA reports.
What kind of fraud are we talking about?
There are documented instances, or at least strong allegations, of EIA reports containing fabricated data, maybe inaccurate baseline readings, or even, shockingly, plagiarized sections.
Plagiarized data? How?
The source mentions cases where the same environmental baseline data describing, say, specific local plants or water conditions has apparently been cut and pasted into reports for projects in completely different geographical locations.
That's unbelievable. How does that happen?
A big part of the problem is the lack of a centralized, reliable, and independent baseline environmental database. Without that, it's very difficult for regulators to effectively cross-check the data submitted in an EIA report and spot these kinds of manipulations.
It sounds like a massive gap in oversight, and this lack of accountability seems directly linked to what many consider the most fundamental flaw in the whole setup, the conflict of interest. Can you explain that?
This really gets to the heart of the trust issue. The consultants, the agencies that are hired to prepare these detailed EIA reports, who pays them?
Let me guess. The company proposing the project.
Exactly. The project proponent, the entity that wants the clearance, pays the consultant, often quite large sums, to prepare the report that will be used to judge their project.
That sounds inherently problematic.
It is. The source material is quite blunt about it, suggesting it's hard to imagine any consultant, indicating that the project is not viable when they're being paid by the developer.
So the report might become more of an advocacy document than an objective assessment.
That's the inherent risk. The financial relationship creates a powerful incentive, conscious or unconscious, to produce a report that favors the project getting cleared. It compromises the scientific independence right at the source.
And is there any comeback for consultants who do a bad job or submit dodgy reports?
That's another part of the problem, the lack of effective liability or penalties. If consultants face little risk of being seriously penalized, blacklisted, or held legally accountable for fraudulent or misleading reports, the incentive to cut corners or produce favorable but flawed reports remains strong.
So proponents might just shop around for the consultant who gives them the easiest ride.
That's the concern, yes, favoring cost and speed over scientific rigor and accuracy.
Okay, one last major criticism mentioned is more about usability, particularly regarding that public hearing stage, the reports themselves.
Yes, the EIA reports are often criticized for being incredibly bulky and overly technical. We're talking hundreds, sometimes thousands of pages, filled with dense scientific jargon, complex mathematical models, lots of tables and figures that are pretty impenetrable to the average person.
So how can the public meaningfully participate if they can't even understand the basis for the discussion?
That's exactly the problem. It hinders effective public comprehension. And frankly, it can even challenge the decision makers themselves. who often have to rely on summaries. Remember, the public typically gets just 30 days to review this massive technical document.
Yeah, that 30-day window seems tiny for such complex material.
It does. So the risk is that the public hearing, which should be a cornerstone of democratic input, becomes more of a procedural formality than a genuine substantive consultation because people haven't had a fair chance to grapple with the information.
Okay, so we have loopholes, lack of expertise, data issues, conflicts of interest, and reports that are hard to understand. It paints a picture of a system with significant challenges. What does the source suggest needs to be done? What are the recommendations for fixing EIA?
The recommendations generally aim at strengthening those weak pillars, making sure projects get assessed, ensuring the assessment is independent and high quality, and making participation more meaningful.
All right, let's take those one by one. First, how to close the loopholes. Better applicability.
The core recommendation is pretty direct. All projects that are likely to significantly alter ecosystems should need environmental clearance, period, regardless of whether they hit an arbitrary investment threshold or happen to be on a specific list.
Base it on impact, not cost.
Yes, and linked to that, a stronger line, no industrial development should be allowed in ecologically fragile or sensitive zones at all. Protection first in those areas.
Okay. Now, tackling that huge conflict of interest problem, how do you ensure independence?
This is absolutely fundamental. The preparation of the EIA report must be financially independent of the project proponent.
How could that work?
The suggested model involves creating a central fund for EIAs. The company wanting the project pays the required fee into this central fund. Then, an independent government body, not the company, selects and pays a qualified third-party agency from an approved list to actually conduct the EIA study.
So breaking that direct financial link.
Exactly. And crucially, any consultants or agencies caught submitting false or substandard reports need to face real consequences, immediate and permanent blacklisting, perhaps even legal action.
Makes sense. Accountability for the consultants. And finally, strengthening the public participation aspect.
Two key things here. First, public hearings should apply to all projects that have environmental impacts, not just the current selection. Wider application of that democratic check.
More hearings.
Yes. And second, bringing the public into the follow-up. The post-clearance monitoring shouldn't just be left to government officials. Local communities and civil society groups should be formally involved in monitoring compliance and reporting violations.
Like creating local environmental watchdogs.
Sort of. It creates a decentralized vigilance mechanism using local knowledge and presence to ensure companies stick to the rules after they get clearance. Currently, that follow-through is often weak. #outro.
Huh.
Okay, as we wrap up this very detailed deep dive, let's just quickly recap the absolute essential facts, the kind of things you need locked in for exams.
All right, your quick prelims pointers recap. First, the Parent Act giving EIA its legal basis.
That's the Environment Protection Act, 1986. And the key rulebook we discussed is the EIA Notification, 2006.
Got it. Now, the EIA cycle stages, in order.
Remember the 8. Screening for Cat B, scoping, baseline data collection, impact prediction, mitigation measures and EIA report prep, public hearing, decision-making appraisal, and finally post-clearance monitoring. That sequence is vital.
Okay, and the key institutional acronyms and their roles.
EAC Expert Appraisal Committee advises centrally. SEAC State Expert Appraisal Committee advises at the state level. MOEFCC Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, the Central Clearing Authority, and CAC State Level Environment Impact Assessment Authority, the State Clearing Authority. Committees advise, authorities decide.
Perfect. And lastly, the project categorization.
Category A, mandatory EC, appraised centrally by MOEACEA, no screening. Category B, appraised at state level by CSEAC. Need screening first. Leads to B1, full EIA required. Or B2, full EIA not required.
Excellent factual summary. Now let's zoom out for the main insights. Thinking conceptually, why does getting this EIA process right matter so much for India's broader development goals?
Well, it's absolutely critical, isn't it? A robust, scientifically sound, transparent, and participatory EIA process isn't just about protecting trees or rivers in isolation.
It's bigger than that.
Much bigger. A faulty, or worse, a corrupt EIA system directly undermines sustainable development. It can lead to irreversible environmental damage, yes, but also social conflict over resources, displacement without proper justice, and ultimately, it can hinder long-term economic stability and prosperity. You can't build lasting development on a degraded environmental foundation.
So the integrity of this process is like a firewall.
Exactly. It's meant to be the firewall protecting against unsustainable development. But, as all those criticisms we discussed show, if the implementation is weak, if governance fails,
Then the firewall gets breached.
yes. And there's a real risk the whole system flips from its intended principle. The foundational idea is the polluter pays principle. If you cause damage, you bear the cost of fixing it.
Right.
But if the system becomes weak, if penalties are just seen as a small cost of doing business,
And the polluting project is allowed to continue anyway.
then you risk sliding into a very different and frankly quite cynical principle,
Which is?
the pay and pollute principle.
Pay and pollute. Wow.
Yeah. Where environmental violations aren't a barrier to operation, just another line item in the budget. Compliance stops being a non-negotiable prerequisite for development and becomes just a potential fine, often cheaper than actually investing in proper pollution control or mitigation. That undermines the entire purpose of environmental law.
That really shifts the perspective. It leaves us with a final, quite provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over, especially when thinking about governance.
The critical question becomes, how can we, through political will, strong institutions, legal reforms, citizen action, ensure that environmental compliance isn't treated as an optional extra or a penalty you can just budget for?
How do we make it truly a fundamental, non-negotiable precondition for any development activity in India? The answer to that really holds the key to balancing India's economic aspirations with its environmental future.
A lot to think about there. Thank you for joining us on this very detailed exploration of the EIA process.
Yes, thanks for sticking with us. We'll see you next time on the Deep Dive.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Telegram and Instagram. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.